Welcome, everyone, to this latest United in Hope and Healing webinar, where we are so thrilled to be joined by Dr. Larry Dossey and his wife, Barbara Dossey. So if you're not familiar with Larry, he started out writing this book back decades ago called Healing Words, and this turned into a textbook in medical schools, and it's about prayer and religious practice and spirit in the world of medicine. And so this was really a pioneering thing. And he went on to coin the phrase non-local mind, the idea that there's more to our awareness than just where we are here and now in our minds. And so another pioneering movement was bringing that to our mainstream world. And Barbara, his wife, is beautifully suited to be his wife because she's a pioneer in her own right, bringing holistic nursing into the fore, where you integrate body, mind, and spirit in patient care and also in lay people. But she really focuses on how to help nurses. She's also an RN. Larry's an MD. I didn't say that, but she brings nurses this kind of information on how to take care of patients in more holistic fashions. And she's an expert on Florence Nightingale, a revolutionary nurse in her own right. And so we're in very good company today with Larry and Barbara Dossey. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us from Santa Fe.
We're delighted to be here. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Well, we remember our time with you about, what was it, about a year and a half ago when we were in Santa Fe, and we had the lovely pleasure of coming to your home for lunch, I think, and it was just so wonderful to be there with you. But I think it goes back even further when Eben first met Larry.
Yes, for me, this is one of those highlights of my life, Larry, and it was back there in late 2012, right around the time Proof of Heaven came out, and I was at a conference out in Phoenix, and you were there, and Pim Van Lama was there. And I cannot tell you what a breath of fresh air that was in my whole journey, because in this entire thing, from my coma, Proof of Heaven, trying to share this story, understand the scientific implications, to find two very knowledgeable and respected physicians who were way beyond me in this kind of understanding of the nature of consciousness and of mind. It was just an extraordinary conversation, and for me, one of the highlights of my life. I think what I'd like to open with is... Do
you have any memories of that, Larry?
Oh, I was just rehearsing it in my mind. I mean, it was a great event for me too, and I know I speak for Pim as well. We all three of us have emerged as a kind of a trio in this conversation that's cross-cultural now. Back when you wrote your first book, it was kind of difficult to talk about these issues. It's never been easier than now, and in large measure because of your contribution.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's very kind.
And is that because Proof of Heaven was published in so many different languages?
Well,
bring it to the global community? Is that what you're
just that? I mean, I lost count of how many months it was on the New York Times list, and rightfully so. I mean, you propel the field as nobody else has because of your credentials and your background and your wisdom, and we're all indebted to you, Eben, for that.
Well, thank you. I apprate that very much.
And we had Pim on last week.
Yeah, so this is just
2
perfect
weeks ago.
having you guys hear this go around. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit. Speaking about fantastic books that change the world, this is one of my all-time favorites. Your book on the One Mind. And how I'd like to open now is just kind of ask, what would you say is kind of the best kind of set of evidence, the experimental evidence that really, in your mind, supports this notion of the one mind?
Well, I think that it boils down to double-blind, randomized, controlled experiments that show that our minds really interact through time and space. You can't draw boundaries and say, look, your mind is confined to your brain. Experiments just destroy that attempt to separate minds from one another. Mm-hmm. We can share thoughts at a distance. This is called telepathy, of course. We can know things ahead of time. This is called precognition. So if you just want to look how the mind behaves, you can bring all sorts of pieces of evidence to show that the attempt to segregate it and to separate minds is just foolish. It doesn't work in practice. We have a sense of individuality and personality, and we're brought up to think that we're different from other people, but when you put things under the microscope, it doesn't turn out that way. We're united. There are no boundaries separating us, and it's not for nothing that this has been part of the spiritual meat of many religious traditions throughout human history.
Mhm.
And we're just rediscovering what people throughout history have known, that we're all one. You know, it's ironic now in this coronavirus era that the slogan has been, "We're all in it together."
Right.
I think that's,
Yes.
We've had that same thought, like,
It's
oh
a
my gosh,
pandemic to
they're
show us
finally
that.
realizing.
well, you know, I don't thank the coronavirus for many things, but that's
Yeah,
that's one thing that it reminds us of, that we are all in it together.
that is very true.
Well, speaking of that coronavirus, you know, healthcare is such a huge issue right now. Everyone's paying attention to what the healthcare workers are going through. And Barbara, your nursing work, especially as it relates to Florence Nightingale, because that's another thing that's been around she was around for so long ago. And I read something recently where she was advocating washing hands way back then even. And what else did she bring to the medical field?
Her life is just extraordinary. I think I'd like to start by saying right now we are in the week of the International Nurse and Midwife. And this was designated by the World Health Organization. And then May 12th will be Florence Nightingale's 200th birthday.
Oh.
Florence Nightingale was a researcher, an educator, a statistician, a clinician, created healthcare policy, and her legacy continues because of the depth of her understanding and capacity to collect data and then write reports and do like explode pie charts and show 3 and 4 sets of data at one time to show what was going on per month. She would be extremely proud today to look at nurses and midwives who are carrying the work forward. And she began to, write in the 1880s that it's going to take 100, 150 years to have the kinds of nurses that can change the health of the world. And I think that's where we are right now. And
are we there? Have we made it?
Well, I think what is happening is with the expansion of consciousness, we really truly are moving toward one health, one world, one mind.
And isn't that by bringing this concept of spirit into medicine, right? Same as Larry.
Right, yeah. And that's the thing about nursing. I mean, that is our lens to look at biology, psychology, sociology, spirituality, environment, all of that together. So it's incredible time.
Yeah.
One legacy.
Yeah, really the travesty is ignoring the spirit and only focusing on the body. And it's just, that's been the travesty, is to just ignore that, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work because we know now, based on hard data, that people who do follow some sort of a spiritual path in their life, and I have to say it doesn't seem to matter which one they pick, but if they pick a spiritual path and stick with it, on average, they live 7 to 14 years longer than people who do not follow a spiritual path. And in the process, they have a lower incidence of all the major diseases. That's not to say that spirituality is a guarantee that you're going to enjoy those benefits, but on average, if you just do the statistics, spirituality is good for people's health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great motivation to want to do it. In fact, lots of people start meditating and exploring spirit when they have a big health issue.
That's
right?
true.
Yeah. So this experience of the one mind is what I'm so interested in. The data is so great that helps us to kind of realize, oh my gosh, it could be true because science supports it, but it's that experience. So I know you note that in Zen it's called Satori, in the yoga tradition Samadhi, In Sufism, fana. In Christianity, Christ consciousness. Everyone kind of has a word for this. And maybe in the lay people world, we would call it awakening or something like that. And it really does go so far back.
Yeah, you can trace this back to what were called the Akashic records 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we sort of think that this has been a recent discovery. We have new terms like non-local consciousness, which is just a fancy word for infinite consciousness. But this has been around since almost written records. This idea that we are one, that there are no boundaries, and that our consciousness is essentially infinite in space and time.
So what happened? How did we lose this? I'm always wondering, how did we lose this? What was the lure?
Well, I think in the drift of Western civilization, we came to focus on individuality. You have to do it yourself. You have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, still kids in this culture are beat over the head, really, by this concept of individuality, personal achievement. That's important, but that's only one side of the coin. We have forgotten the unitary collective aspects of who we are. We've had some people who have tried to remind us of this periodically. Carl Jung and his idea of the collective unconscious was one of the great ones. Emerson had this idea that there is one mind, and these men were not shy about talking about this. But this was eclipsed in modern Western civilization by this emphasis on the individual, the solitary person against great odds. This sort of thing just carries the day in the culture. I'm happy to say that. I think we're getting out of that, however. Yeah. One reason is the insights of only 15 million Americans who have had near-death experiences, who come away with their lives totally transformed. And nobody's spoken more beautifully about this than Eben. Mm-hmm. But I think we're transcending this fetish of the individual, and I would just say it's about time.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I'm sorry?
No, I'd like to add to that where we had the split in healthcare is Larry and I entered medicine and me in nursing in the mid-60s. Mm-hmm. And at that particular time, it was compassionate care. There was the honoring of physician and nurses in the team. We worked together. We then had a love affair with technology starting in the late 70s, 80s. I was already working in critical care, and I can clearly see what began to happen as we, as nurses at the bedside, learned how to do heart sounds, lung sound, blood gases, and that's where you got the rewards of doing that. I will say one of the things is that I am very blessed that I never lost that. My first head nurse she was an old Army sergeant. She was 4'10", and she was just extraordinary, but she had that military to her, and my maiden name is Montgomery, and she'd say, "Montgomery, come here." And I would go, "Oh my gosh, what did I do wrong?" And she said, "What's going on in there with him? You're doing a lot of talking." And I said, and I'm going, she said, you can tell me everything else. I want to know what his story is. What is he telling you? And so that was the validation for me is Montgomery, keep doing that. And in doing that, it just, one thing added to another. And then one of the reasons that I feel so blessed in, my work is that I love to partner with other nurses. And early on, this is when therapeutic touch, healing touch, imagery, relaxation began to come out in healthcare. And if you did it, you were called a flake. And it was just real clear to me from the work that Larry and I were doing. That's another story, and I can come back to that. But then if we apply the science right there, then things can begin to turn around. And so that became, now 54 years in the profession now. Actually, it's 55 now. just had a birthday.
Congratulations.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Wow.
What a
And
career.
I am absolutely on fire with healthcare and nurses and what I do see coming out of COVID-19 now on the other side.
I agree. And I think what you were saying minutes ago about kind of the individual versus kind of this group experience of being there to help each other, I think that's probably the most fundamental lesson coming out of near-death experiences, is that we truly are all in this together, and to help another is to help ourselves. And so instead of focusing on the individual and love and help for, self, I think we can expand all that. And of course, in the healing arts, we've been doing that for ages. And that's what we're seeing now in this COVID pandemic, is this beautiful sense of being there for each other, kind of bringing to life your notion of the one mind and of being bound together through love.
Right. I think
Isn't it funny? I just love all the heartwarming stories that come out of these crises like hurricanes or, tornadoes. And this is no exception. So many heartwarming stories of how they're celebrating birthdays and visiting their parents in nursing homes on, big telephone pole, whatever those are called, where they lift you up. It's amazing to see all that. That must not have escaped you guys either.
Well, it's yes, it is. It's thrilling. I want to say that the one thing that is certainly going to emerge here is the deep suffering that healthcare professionals, the most I ever can remember taking care of patients was having 2 deaths in a unit a day, but it was maybe I was caring for one, somebody else. But now we're talking about a nurse can experience 5 to 7 deaths, a physician, and everybody is just working there together. There's no room to process. So the deep suffering that is coming out of this, not only the healthcare professionals, but also the people that have died. And there's no family members. And I know, for one of the great gifts in my life was to be with my mom when she died. And all those tender, loving rituals of healing and the things that are said, and that just, that moment in time where you are one with another to watch them take the last breath and cross over. So this is something that truly we will have to process coming out of COVID-19, because our healthcare workers are overwhelmed and have not had time to process any of it.
Yes, it's truly a tragedy, especially in the setting of not necessarily having all the equipment they need. That to me has been one of the saddest aspects of this, is seeing kind of endless examples of people who didn't have enough to protect themselves. And then of course you get healthcare workers infected and dying from it. But getting back to the point you made about how they're dying alone now, I would like to get your thoughts on that in terms of prayer, especially because prayer is not necessarily a local thing. And prayer can have tremendous benefits in many ways. You've written a lovely book about that. I'm just wondering if you'd like to comment about prayer, especially in the setting of the tragedy of people dying alone and the stresses on the healthcare workers.
Well, prayer is an act of uniting with another individual in a spiritual context. And if 2 people understand what prayer is, the unity has already happened. The experiments show that I can have a thought about your healing, and that will actually have physiological effects. So this is not just metaphor we're talking about. When we talk about the linkage that connects people through space and through time, this is real and demonstrable, and has now even been taught in medical schools that have the courage to talk about the nature of consciousness. Actually, it is not possible, even in principle, for a dying person to be really separated from those who love them. Love is a very non-local activity. And to the extent that we don't understand that, then we talk about people dying alone. In principle, it's impossible. And this is the message that we need to talk about, particularly in this coronavirus era where you're not allowed to have close contact with a dying individual. In one sense, that's tragic. In another sense, it's an illusion. Mm-hmm. So I think the role that all of us play is to remind people that aloneness is an illusion.
What are some of the prayer studies you could refer to really convince people that it's real? Like you have some retroactive prayer studies and some other things, and praying for non-human substances.
Those are my favorite prayer studies, the non-human ones. I love it. I love them because skeptics always say, well, if you pray for somebody and they get better, that's just the placebo response. They knew you were praying for them, so they just ginned up their internal resources, and it's fictional that your thoughts could affect somebody at a distance. Well, if you do those studies on non-humans, like if you pray for bacteria in a test tube to grow quicker and faster and replicate more aggressively than the microorganisms in the test tubes that do not get prayed for, you can't say the bacteria were just thinking positively.
It's placebo.
Yeah, as far as we know, bacteria don't think positively. They're not subject to the placebo response. So that you do these studies in non-sentient creatures and they're positive, you've really got something.
Yeah.
Has that convinced any of these hardcore people who don't want to come over to the light side?
Oh, I think most skeptics will go to their graves thinking that they are right. It's hard to break through, but if you teach these experiments to young kids who are coming through medical school before they have solidified their prejudices, then that's the hope for the future. And we are making incredible progress. Now, most kids going through medical school have gotten wind that, well, this consciousness stuff, there are a lot of experiments that say that we got it wrong in college when we were told that the brain makes consciousness and your mind is confined to the brain and the body and it's all over when you die. These kids know now that there's another story to be told.
Right.
And so it's changing. So there's hope for the future.
Does the concept of prayer come into the holistic nursing principles?
Well, there's no way to separate it, body, mind, spirit. And that's one of the modalities in healing. And nurses are very skillful at finding out what a person wants and needs, and just asking a simple question like, what can I do for you right now? And often it's, would you pray for me?
That is so beautiful.
I've been hearing too about all of the patients, the surviving COVID patients who come out of their experience telling the people how wonderful and caring their healthcare practitioners were. And so even though they're under all this amazing stress, they're still doing their jobs. It's so amazing to hear those things. And
one thing, people are kept on these ventilators and they paralyze the diaphragm. They don't paralyze the consciousness.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so they will remember voices. They can wake up and identify something that a doctor or a nurse did. So.
Let me add that I think there are still a lot of people who are really nervous around this term prayer. And I think this is totally unnecessary. One way of getting around people's squeamishness about the issue of prayer is to just say, well, if this offends you, why don't you just extend love and caring instead of, and you can just set prayer over to one side if you want to do that and skirt your apprehensiveness about bringing religion and spirituality into the mix. Mm-hmm. I've never seen anybody turn down love and compassion
Right.
So I think there are other ways of addressing this instead of using the term prayer. And I changed my vocabulary depending on the audience.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still make the same point by emphasizing compassion and caring and love.
I think that's a very good point.
And there's different kinds of prayer, like centering prayer is your favorite.
Yeah, I've definitely, I must say, since my coma experience, because the prayer that I would practice before my coma, and for 8 years before the coma, I practiced no prayer at all, but before that I had. And that was more of a form of supplicative prayer, of asking for this or that to be done. But ever since my coma, it's been very clear to me that centering prayer, which is a form of basically nonverbal prayer, just going within and connecting with that God force of pure love that has total healing within it, and just asking thy will be done, not in any kind of religious or biblical sense, but just going for the highest and best outcome for all involved. And I know I was looking through your book, Healing Words, a little earlier, and I know you kind of hit on the same thing very powerfully there.
Yep. Yeah, we're on the same page, literally.
Right, yeah.
Yes, we are definitely on the same page.
And that's a wonderful expression of what compassion is that you are so intimately connected with another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just pure love is what it is.
It is.
So bringing compassion to a health care situation is just a no-brainer. So what both of you have done to bring that into our medical care, all of us lay people, patients of the world are very appreciative, because having that caring sense when you're scared and you're sick and you don't know what's going on and you're getting poked with needles, or maybe you're on a ventilator, having that human loving presence is so, so helpful. So
You sound like a nurse.
She's got that beautiful, loving spirit. I
resonate with you guys, and I am a layperson. I don't know it from your side, but I know it as a patient, and I know the difference when there's a caring doctor, nurse, or even a technician, or one who's not. And most of them, I have to say, are very caring as well. I agree. It's just wonderful that we've brought that into medical care.
I think it's a lot of the work that you've done, Larry, to actually provide that to medical schools over the last few decades have gotten a lot more open to courses in spirituality and emphasizing the importance of spirituality in being a healing physician. And I think the world certainly would credit you with a lot of that effort.
Well, thank you for saying that. I will acknowledge that we have come an awful long way. Back when I was in medical school, one of our professors at the medical school wanted to start a meditation course for the medical students all 4 years on campus. And he was brought before the dean and censored. And he was told that you can do this, but you will have to do it off campus, because we cannot permit something like meditation to be part of the teaching program here.
Yeah.
And so it was a professional embarrassment. And you actually risk your career to align with something now so elemental as meditation. I mean, we just shake our heads now, that it was like that once, but it was. I mean,
well, it's like the word prayer. Connotes some very religious practice, and many of us aren't necessarily as religious as maybe people used to be. But meditation connotes, for me, it used to connote, a monk sitting in a cave alone for weeks on end, maybe not eating, and it wasn't something that sounded very appealing. But it was the Dalai Lama who really motivated that study of prayer, of meditation in science. And it's people like that who really, you're in the same field there, the same.
I think one of the things that's very useful in healthcare is, speaking of it, is reflective practice. And then that way it allows people to open up and to use whatever word they want. And then if they're comfortable with prayer or with meditation, then you can take it in that way, but it's honoring that person's story.
Yeah, we often say going within.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
that's
just to
pretty
keep
neutral.
it generic. So,
Yeah, I would just also point out in hearing your story, Larry, about years ago and the trouble getting prayer into curriculum, that kind of thing. We've been using placebo effect for more than 6 decades now as our gold standard, you
Yes.
know, of comparing any new treatment, you know, the double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And that is a very profound admission by the medical profession that beliefs and kind of spirit has tremendous impact on healing. And yet it's a kind of a schizophrenic thing that no, we can't talk about prayer.
Expand it to
I've tried to expand placebo into something I call telesebo.
Mm-hmm.
And telesebo kind of shifts the effectiveness of thought and consciousness from the patient, which we call placebo,
Mm-hmm.
to the physician. And it's a way of saying that your thoughts and intentions do actually have an effect on that patient that's sitting across the desk from you or is lying in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
So be careful what you think and you feel and you intend toward that patient, because that is not neutral. That's the telesebo effect.
And I think that's probably the real effect. I mean, it's obviously a combination. It's not just an isolated patient wants to get better kind of thing, but it has to do with everyone. And I think that's where prayer comes in handy. But the healing person also is deeply into that equation.
Yes.
And the patient knows whether that person that's helping them is authentic or not.
Right.
yes, we do.
It's a heart resonance. They can
Right.
certainly feel that. One thing I'd like to bring up, Larry, in preparing for this, it was interesting to me in looking through some of your kind of reasons for writing the book, One Mind. You mentioned precognitive dreams, and I was wondering if you'd like to mention a little more about that and what role it played.
Yes. Well, I had entered my internal medical practice, and this was in the first year, and I had one of the most remarkable dreams I think I've ever had in my life. I dreamt that this situation got played out at some point in time. I thought it was in the past, and I just didn't know about it, but as it turned out, these were all future events that I dreamt about. Make long story short, here was the son of one of my cardiology colleagues. We were in practice together, and he was on an examination table, and there's some technician trying to do something to the head, and he just went crazy. And he was about 5 years old, and his mother was standing there, and she was trying to comfort him, but this whole procedure, whatever it was just going south. And finally, this technician threw up her hands, and she said, "I quit." And she turned around and walked away. And that was a dream. I thought, this is so strange. I started to wake my wife up and tell her about it, but I thought, this is so crazy. I can't bother her with this. So I was having lunch with this cardiologist the next day. This was following the dream. And in walks the wife, carrying the 5-year-old, and he's got his head wet, and he's really angry, and he's crying, and he's fussy. And she proceeded to tell her husband, the cardiologist, my dream. And he had had a febrile seizure, so they phoned the neurologist and said, bring him by the EEG lab the next day, and we'll do the brainwave test to make sure he doesn't have epilepsy or something like this. And so I couldn't believe this. And after she left with this little boy, I went to the office of the cardiologist, and we sat down and we had a talk. I told him about my dream, and he didn't want to hear it. He said, don't bother me with it. And he knew as well as I knew that if I was not lying, then the world worked in a different way than we had been taught. And he didn't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And he refused to listen. And he said, I don't want to hear any more about this. And so that was the end of the conversation.
Wow.
I thought, I think something's going on with cause and effect and precognition. And I didn't even know the terminology for this stuff at that point in my life. But in the next month, I had 3 more of these suckers, and I thought,
Wow.
I think I've got the message here, and that really had an enormous impact on my idea about consciousness being non-local with respect to time, that there are no boundaries between past, present, and future, and all of that. And it was a learning experience for me. Word got out that I was interested in this sort of thing, and my patients began to share stuff with me about dreams they had about their own diagnosis and what was going on inside their bodies. And nurses got involved. They began to tell me stuff that I didn't even know they were experiencing. So I had the material for a book in just about 12 months, collecting all of these reports.
Mm-hmm.
And so I became a lot braver, and I began to talk about this sort of stuff at medical conferences, and this sort of culminated at a Harvard continuing medical education conference at which I spoke, and I decided I would share with them my experiences and make a fool out of myself just to see what would happen. And then in the Q&A, they began to tell me, this is the Harvard conference, they began to share with me stuff that they would introduce by saying, now, I've never told anybody this before in my life, but here's what happened to me. And so the whole room began to get involved with this spirit of confession. One female internist got up and said, well, I have dreams of my patients' laboratory tests, and I dream the exact values of these laboratory reports before I even order the tests. I thought that was pretty good. And it just kept going. And I thought, if we could just give doctors permission to be honest, and talk about this stuff without feeling that they're risking their careers, by going public with this sort of stuff, we would be surprised about what's out there.
I think you're
Well, go ahead, Barbara.
I'd also like to add here, both of us are twins. And so this has given us deeper understanding and new capacities to, be aware and alert to this. So, because we had these things about, anticipating, like if our twin is in trouble before it happens, or simultaneously when it is happening, knowing something has happened.
So that really, really speaks to the power of direct personal experience, which is something we talk about a lot, that you don't learn about the one mind by reading about the studies as much as you do by experiencing it in your own life. And so you guys both had that early on in your life, which probably made you more open to it and less likely to just put it aside after going through med school. So the more people can have these kind of experiences and feel comfortable about sharing them, it reminds me how Eben, too, with his near-death experience and being, the Harvard neurosurgeon, he has all kinds of stories. I've never told anyone this, but because they feel safe, he will accept what they say.
Share a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Sounds familiar.
Another question there along the lines of the precognition, Larry. It brings up the whole question of things like predeterminism versus free will. And I'm just wondering how your kind of deeper understanding, looking at this kind of thing for your whole life, where are you on the whole notion of free will and the soul and its purpose, that kind of thing?
Well, I believe that we do have free will. I don't think that we can dismiss the formative experiences that accumulate across the course of a lifetime. Of course, those affect us in terms of how we exercise our free will. But I'm a defender of choice, and I don't think we can interpret human experience by saying that we're on automatic. I think the experiments themselves confirm that choice is a very potent factor. What you intend and what you will and what you think go a long way in how life unfolds. So I'm pretty open to the idea of free will.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, I'm very comfortable with that too. I believe it all has to do with soul and soul journey, that we really are here to manifest the world of our higher soul. And for me, it's an issue not to get too bogged down in your ego and what it wants, but to try. That's why I love going within and meditating, is getting more in touch with that kind of higher soul or collected unconscious primordial mind, however you want to put it, in terms of finding our will in the world, our meaning and purpose, and then making those choices properly in how we deal with other beings and all of it. I agree with you totally, free will. But I think the whole precognition, and as you know, in physics, there's a huge world of retrocausality, looking at events changing the past, essentially. So I think our understanding of time is really muddled and needs some great clarification in modern science.
I have a small library dedicated to the exploration of free will and the nature of time. All of our concepts about choice and free will really are wedded to our idea of time. And I think these concepts go together. It's interesting to me that there is no agreed on concept of what time even is in physics. I mean, you have people taking all sorts of stands, very well recognized physicists are at each other's throats about the nature of time. So for me, it just says that we have to look inside and follow our own wisdom about how these things operate in our lives.
And how does purpose fit into that age-old question, why are we here and what is our purpose? What have you learned through that lens, that free will kind of lens?
Not to get too excited about it. I mean, I think our ability to understand these things is itself limited. And I can think of nothing more foolish than to apply a limited intelligence to some really deep questions like this. So I tend to be sort of nonchalant and non-committal about a lot of these things in the hope that someday we will understand it.
I like that. I like that answer.
Yes.
And we've been talking all about the one mind, and that keeps everyone all up here. And I was struck by something we have in common when we were at your home in Santa Fe a while back, and that is that we both collect heart rocks. Rocks from out in the world that just happen to look like hearts. I've been collecting these for quite a long time, so I grabbed a couple, and I was walked out on your back porch. There was this big basket filled with them. Yours are big, though. A lot of mine are very small. I have just the most amazing story. My grandson is 2 years old, and I haven't seen him, of course, in a couple months, but we're very close. And he and my daughter visit here a lot. They live just a few hours away. And today, my daughter texted me a photo where Dominic, my grandson, found a little pebble on the ground and said heart rock and gave it to his mother, and it looked like a little heart, a little tiny one.
That big.
So I guess he's seen mine or he thought of it himself. I don't know. But what spurred you to collect heart rocks? I don't know if it's both of you or just one of you.
We both do. Yeah.
Okay, how? What spurred you? How did that come about?
Well, I see it as a kind of a subtle message from God knows where to find a perfectly shaped heart rock when I'm out walking, which is where I usually discover these things. For me, it's just a little tweak, a little message from the universe that says, don't take this for granted. I mean, these things have a way of communicating with us, even though they're part of nature. And,
I have to keep my eyes looking for them sometimes. I really keep my eye out for them. Do you do that too, or do they just pop up?
What I find is just to be there with soft eyes, just walking along. And we're very blessed. We've backpacked for 40 years. So we've always been out in nature for extended periods in the summertime, particularly. And they're just there. And the biggest one we have, Larry found down in our arroyo as we were building our home. And he put it on the rock pile. He turned it upside down. It was just a dark surface. On the other side, it's white. It's not white, it's an off-white. And he didn't tell them what to do. He just said, guys, I'm just going to put this rock here. Maybe you could figure out if it belongs here or not.
In the
And
chimney.
and it's now a heart rock in our fireplace.
I remember seeing that.
Yes.
You just reminded me of that. Yeah.
You might be interested to know that there was a book on the nature of consciousness that was published about 10 years ago by a very eloquent author called The Mind of a Rock. And I bring that up just to say, we're not the only 4 people
Right.
on the planet who
Oh,
have
I know.
that rocks do contain messages. So
Yeah.
I hope it makes all of us feel a little bit better.
Right.
Yeah, I've always liked rocks in general. And it was only about, I don't know, 15 years ago that I started noticing the ones shaped like hearts. So very, very fun.
May I share that before we wind up? I would love to send y'all a Nurses Global Coherence 2020, as we're now in 2020 International Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. And this is a designated one long year by the World Health Organization to look at the value of nurses and their work. This was declared a year ago. They didn't know about COVID-19 coming. And now to have this focus right now on nurses and their work in healthcare. But I'd love to send it's a meditation that we will do on May 12th. And the meditation is in 9 languages right now. One of our partners is Heart Math. It will be on their website. You can download an app and then you can listen to it in the different languages and it will light up wherever people are listening to it at that particular time.
So how do people find out about that? Is there a website?
There is right now. You can go to nivision.net, www.nigh, N-I-G-H, stands for Nightingale, but Nightingale Initiative for Global Health, but www.nighnet.com.
Okay, got it. I'm sure that's being put into the chat screen right now for people. That's wonderful. And speaking of things going on, you, Larry, and Eben and I were both involved in the Aegis Living PBS series, which actually is a collection of, I guess, spiritual type leader talkers from all walks of life. And with George and Serena Capinelli, who pulled all these people together at 3 separate events. And ours was in Santa Fe, and that's when we got to come have a meal with you. Yours was at another location. But we both ended up in the same season. So apparently there's 3 seasons of 10 episodes each. They'll play back to back. And we're the second to the last episode. So that must mean we're close to that big finale. And you're just before us, I believe, a couple episodes. And so if people want to learn about that, it's in local PBS networks around the United States. And what it takes to get it in your network is to call your local PBS channel. I'm told it only takes like 3 to 5 phone calls. So even if your family and friends do it, it makes a difference. It catches their eye and they'll bring it to their town. I don't know if it's in our Charlottesville area yet, but I know it started in New Mexico and it's starting to roll out. So anyone who wants to know about that, go to agelesslivingseries.com. It should be fascinating. Have you started to see the episodes?
We've seen a few of them, but we will see more. We're having a chat with George and Sedina tomorrow.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes. We had a little chat with them a few weeks ago. I don't know if that's been posted yet, but yeah, it's going to be a wonderful thing. So we're going to just, we're going to do our, meditation that we do each time to really connect through our binding force of love. But before we do that, the golden rule you speak of very nicely, that it's a little bit different now when you start to think about the one mind. Can you speak to that a bit, Larry?
Well, I think that we need to revise the golden rule from its customary form, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, to something like this. Be kind to others because in some sense they are you.
Absolutely.
I've got about 7 lines from Hafiz, a 14th century Persian poet. Can I leave them with you?
Yes, please,
Yes,
please.
Please do.
Well, Hafiz wrote, 14th century, let's go deeper, for if we do, our spirits will embrace and interweave, and our union will be so glorious that even God will not be able to tell us apart.
Beautiful. I love that.
Well, that's one of the things we do each time we have this webinar is we feel that connection with each other. And in fact, we started a couple webinars ago, this 11 a.m. love concept, where each day at 11 a.m. from wherever you are, feel that sense of love and gratitude from within, and know that through the heart math research, we know that that electromagnetic field of your love is spreading out around you. That's what I call the ultimate golden rule. When you bring that love and gratitude in your heart, it affects the people around you without having to say a word. And so that is that one heart, all connected as one, that I like to point out. So
Beautiful, beautiful.
Great.
so this is gone way too fast.
Oh, I know. I wish we had another few hours. You all are wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Made a tremendous contribution to this world, and we greatly appreciate your contribution today.
Oh my gosh, this night vision, and the fact that, see, this is the thing, when we have these hardships, when we're in the middle of them and there's all this despair and death and concern and economic fallouts and everything, we think, oh my gosh, and it's really what comes out of it that can be so valuable. And so the idea that this nursing ode to nurses is happening right when the whole world is paying attention to doctors and nurses. That's pretty good timing.
That's beautiful.
Well done.
Great timing.
We couldn't have planned it any better, right? Once we get to the other side, we'll see what all the benefits are, and we'll look back and go, thank God we went through that crisis together.
Yeah.
Well, let's stay in touch as if we could not.
Yes.
We will, for sure.
Yes, and hopefully we'll be able to see you physically soon, but if not, we'll stay in touch through our binding force of love, because we love you both.
Thank you so much for being on.